right. Hi, everyone. My name is Ida Lilly. I'm the program coordinator for the Word of Storytelling Sanctuary. We're a nonprofit that fights for equity and inclusion in publishing and in literature and through literature also. You can learn more about us at thewordfordiversity.org. And tonight we have a wonderful treat for you as part of Margins Bookstores Month, which is a celebration of bookstores owned and managed by and for BIPOC, LGBTQIA2 plus disabled and neurodiverse communities. This is a community collaboration coordinated by us and about 50 Margins bookstores. We also want to say thank you to our major sponsors, bookshop.org and Chronicle Books. So Margins Bookstore is all this month. You'll see on our socials and on our website a highlight of a lot of different bookstores. And also you will see that we have had some nominations for Joy Award, our Healer Award, and our Activating Read Award. Tonight we're going to celebrate the Joy Award, which went to KINK Stories, which was edited by Garth Greenwell and R.O. Kwon. Tonight we're going to have Zeyn, who was a contributor, and R.O. Kwon, who was the editor, joining us. So that's really exciting. You can also go to our website and look at our online interactive map to find a Margins bookstore and get to know them a little bit better. You can also support these bookstores by purchasing the journal and t-shirts, tote bags, and all of these different items and merch we have that will support these bookstores, in addition to you being able to buy items from them all year round, not just this month. So please, always support them because they are very important to not just the communities that they're directly in, but to publishing as a whole. They're somewhere between 3 to 4% of maybe 10,000 independently owned bookstores in the United States. 3 to 4% are owned by someone from a marginalized community, which is incredibly low. And so every bit of support you can offer goes a long way to helping these stores who shoulder so many duties. And they are among the few healing spaces that our communities have. So they're very important, and thus the month. You can learn more about them. I'll put a link into our chat. You learn more about those bookstores at thewordfordiversity.org/margins bookstores. So tonight, like I said, we're going to celebrate KINK Stories. It was nominated and selected by the Margins Bookstores Collective for the Joy Award, which celebrates what is pure and vibrant. This award is for a read that showcases and spreads joy in our communities. And your purchase of the book today via the link that I'll put in the YouTube comments, which is also in the description, will support the Margins Bookstores Collective of stores. Our moderator tonight, we have two wonderful friends of the Word. Bunmi Ishola is part of the Word. She's actually our board chair. And then Angela is part of, she's the owner of Duende District. You probably see her a lot. We do a lot of events with her. So we'll have two awesome moderators tonight. Bunmi Ishola is a former journalist and middle school teacher and currently a children's book editor at Penguin Random House. And again, she's our board chair and one of the first people that I met in the publishing world because we went to school together. So it's nice to get to hang out with her. Angela Maria Spring is the owner of Duende District, a mobile oh my gosh, why am I having this terrible pronunciation? Mobile boutique bookstore for and by people of color, where all are welcome. They hold an MFA from Sarah Lawrence College and are poetry editor at the Washington Independent Review of Books. You can find her forthcoming and recent work in A Public Space, The Slowdown Show, The Acentos Review, Gasher, Journal, Muzzle Magazine, Pank, and elsewhere. You can learn more about Duende District at duendedistrict.com or on Twitter and Instagram at Duende District. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and thank you so much to Bunmi and to Angela. Bunmi, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ida, so much. As she said, we are so excited to have with us the editor and author, editor, author, and author, one of the authors in KINK, which won the Joy Award, which was nominated by the Bookstore Collective. And so I'm going to do a quick introduction of our guests, and then they will actually be doing a little bit of a reading for us so that you could hear a little bit of this beautiful book that is bringing joy and that we were excited to share with you. So I'll start with Zeyn. Zeyn Joukhadar is the author of the novels The Map of Salt and Stars and The 30 Names of Night. The 30 Names of Night won the 2021 Stonewall Book Award and is a 2021 Lambda Literary Award finalist. The Map of Salt and Stars, currently being translated into 20 languages, was a 2018 Middle East Book Award winner and a 2018 Goodreads Choice Award finalist. Joukhadar's work has appeared in Salon, the Paris Review, Shondaland, KINK, and elsewhere, and has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and the Best of the Net. He is a member of the Radius of Arab American Writers and a mentor with the Paraplus Collective and the guest editor of the 2020 Queer plus Trans Voices issues of Mizna, excuse me, I'm stumbling over words now. Kwon's nationally best-selling first novel, The Incendiaries, is published by Riverhead and is being translated into 7 languages. Named a Best Book of the Year by over 40 publications, The Incendiaries was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle John Leonard Award for Best First Book and the Los Angeles Times First Book Prize. Kwon's writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, the Paris Review, NPR, and elsewhere. She's a National Endowment for the Arts Fellow. Thank you both for joining us. And I'm going to pass it on to Reese first, and you can read, I believe you said, from the introduction of KINK.
Yeah, I'll read from the introduction, which is written by me and Garth together. But first, Bunmi, Angela, and Aida, thank you so much for having us. Thank you for this award. We really like an award from marginalized booksellers. It's like the highest possible honor I can imagine. Like we're really just like ecstatic about this. Thank you. And thank you for this collective, and thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for all the good work you do like year round in this hard time. Really, really appreciate you. Okay. All right. And I'm extra excited to be here with Zeyn. We haven't been able to do an event together because of the time difference, because Zeyn is in Italy right now and is staying up to join us, which is also
it's
really
a pajama party.
So thank you, Zeyn. Okay, well, this is just a short introduction to the whole book. And again, Garth and I wrote this together. And I changed all the RO cons to I, so I'm not talking about myself in the third person. Okay, so in late 2017, I was at MacDowell, the artist residency in Peterborough, New Hampshire, when I read Garth Greenwell's story Gospodar in a recent issue of the Paris Review, as well as a MacDowell library copy of Melissa Febos's Whip Smart, a memoir of her time working as a dominatrix in New York. Wouldn't it be wonderful, I thought, if stories like these could live together in one book, and the kind of book that could sit on artist residency's library shelves. I asked Garth, whom I knew from an interview, if he'd like to co-edit such a book, and he said yes. Here is a book with writing from some of the most exciting, groundbreaking, acclaimed voices in fiction today. These stories bring the full power of literature to bear on depicting love, desire, sadomasochism, and sexual kink in their considerable glory. A book like this hasn't been published in a long time. Literature is a great technology for the communication of consciousness, and these stories are acute in their exploration of psychology, but they also recognize that all experience is embodied, and that bodies are always situated in the realities of history and culture, the crucibles of class, race, nationhood, and gender. By taking kink seriously, these stories recognize how the questions raised in intimate kinky encounters, questions of power, agency, identity, can help us to interrogate and begin to rescript the larger cultural narratives that surround us. In many of these stories, kink can also deepen and complicate urgent conversations around how consent is established, negotiated, and sometimes broken. Kink is often pathologized in popular culture. The attendant desire is flattened, simplified, and turned into a joke, a cause for only shame. In movies, television shows, and popular books, kinky people are often also serial killers, emotionally stunted plutocrats, and other stock villains or exaggerated figures of fun. Instead of pathologizing kink, the stories in this anthology treat it as a complex, psychologically rich act of communication. Kink in these stories is a way of processing trauma and also processing joy, of expressing tenderness and cruelty and affection and play. The emotional dynamics of kink are as varied as those of any other human experience, and the stories here explore the whole gamut of human feeling, from exuberance to anguish. Rejecting and reductive ideas of normalcy and aberrance, these stories allow for investigations richer than ideology, treating kink as one of the tools we use to make sense of our lives. In Life magazine in 1963, James Baldwin said, "You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read." It was Dostoevsky and Dickens who taught me that the things that tormented me most were the very things that connected me with all the people who were alive, who had ever been alive. We hope that in this book you'll find fellowship. We hope it helps close some of the distances between our solitudes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was so lovely. And I love that ending line was just like so perfect. This idea of finding fellowship, which is why we read, I think, is a lot of times to see ourselves and to be seen. And so, yeah, I just love that. Thank you for that. All right, Zeyn, we would love to hear you do a bit of reading from your story that was your contribution to this collection.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for having us and for this award. I mean, again, just to echo what Reese said, everybody was so thrilled about this. It really means so much. So I'm just going to read the first few pages from my short story, The Voyeurs. The Peeping Tom had left a pair of gray men's briefs under the sugar maple behind the house. The underwear lay rumpled across the fresh crust of snow, the kind of crust Omar loved to watch Belen crunch with her boots when they went out for their morning walks. It was a Sunday. These walks had become a daily ritual even in January. On their first date, Belen had told Omar that the winter was the most beautiful thing about New England. She loved the unspooling aloneness that walking in the snow made her feel. Omar had been nursing a bitterness toward Connecticut when they'd met, an undigested resentfulness about staying put after his divorce. But Jordan was happy in his school and he'd made friends here, which allowed Omar to withstand the judgmental silence of his neighbors who had known his ex-husband and gawked at his transition. A little more than a year after his divorce, he'd met Belen. The winter he really wanted to escape, Belen had suggested to Omar after a few dates, snug inside a corner of the town's only coffee shop, was the winter of other people's eyes. Belen used the rubber toe of her boot to kick free the frozen curve of the briefs, a cotton melange with a thick brand name waistband. The waistband was stiff with frozen sweat, weighted down by it in the snow. She said, "I told you there was somebody out here last night." Omar looked up at their bedroom window. The briefs must have been slipped off on purpose. The peeper wanted them to know they had been watched. The night had been exceptionally cold. The wind would have pinked the tip of the erection. With the exception of Omar and Belen, this was a white neighborhood. The voyeur would have puffed his way, red-faced, up into the maple that held the old treehouse, its boards mossed and warped with age. The watcher must have felt the planks groaning in the dark. They debated. Omar wanted to trash the underwear. They were an eyesore on the snow. But Belen was disgusted by the idea of touching them. So in the end, they left the briefs where they were and went inside to run a bath. Jordan was upstate this weekend. What would he have done for childcare without their chosen family these past few years? Omar thought, my God. So he and Belen had a chance to reconnect, a chance to see where their bodies might take them with a good night's sleep and fresh sheets on the bed. Omar found he was relieved to not have to explain the appearance of the briefs to his child. Soon, Jordan would be older. He would ask questions. Belen unwound her red scarf from her hair and shook it out while Omar filled the tub. How he used to love to watch her undo her hair the first few times they'd undressed each other. Belen had been partial to braids during the early part of her transition, had dressed up her dark curls with velvet headbands and butterfly clips. Every trans person has a second adolescence, she told Omar. We have another chance to get it right. These days she wore her hair down, tucked into her coat in the winter to keep her neck warm, and she tied it up now into a bun. She got into the tub with Omar, and he maneuvered himself between her legs to rest his head on her chest, letting the kelp of his pubic hair sway. Belen took the strawberry-shaped sponge and daubed at his scars, the still raw spot under his armpit where a keloid was forming, the hardened patch beneath one nipple where the incision had dehisced. He had to slather medical-grade honey on that spot for weeks, until the white pus spat out the knot of a surgical suture, fine as fishing line. Since his top surgery, bathing each other had been their most reliable intimacy, often their only one. Belen had been the first to identify his post-surgical depression. She'd had a bad bout of it herself years ago, after a hernia operation. Of the days immediately following his surgery, he remembered Belen's hands most. Her hands squeezing the blood from his drains, her hands lifting a glass of water to his mouth. He had always loved her hands. After they'd slept together the first time, he'd seen her in the Price Right on Main the following afternoon and thought, the blood surging between his legs, those elegant hands were inside my body. Omar had missed fucking Belen in these last weeks, but it wasn't quite the sex he missed, or maybe it was another kind of missingness. less a lack of intimacy and more the anticipation of something he hungered for, like a first invigorating run after a period of rest. Intimacy was what he'd missed most during his postpartum depression, after he'd given birth to Jordan 6 years ago, and that was how he was able to differentiate this kind of missingness from the many kinds of human missingness he'd learned to live with since his transition, the missingness of privacy and safety chief among them, along with his faith in the kindness of strangers. Belen was the one who taught Omar to forge a life from this new reality. No-nonsense, double Virgo Belen, who hated when people apologized to inanimate objects. Cis people apologize when they bump into a table, but not when they bump into me, she would quip. Explain me the sense of this. The Belen who found him a new route home from work to avoid the speed bumps that worsened his dysphoria. When he'd wanted to lock himself away from the world, she had managed to get him up and out of the house. Last summer, his dysphoria at its peak, their walks had carried Omar through one of the darkest periods of his life. One evening, they'd come across a family of turkeys in the woods, and he and Jordan had hushed while Belen pointed out the mother fluttering up into the low branches of a beech tree, followed by the fluff of each of her chicks. The mother turkey spread her wings and gathered her babies into her body until they disappeared under her feathers for the night. It reminded her of a picture of the Madonna that hung in her parents' house when she was a girl, Belen said. Piero della Francesca's Virgin of Mercy, all the sinners gathered like chicks beneath Mary's blue mantle. In the tub, Omar turned his head, wanting Belen's eyes on him. He had never stopped wanting her. The wanting pulsed under his skin. He only had to find the way back through the gate of his desire. I'll stop there.
So wonderful. That is such a Zeyn's story is just truly like the layers, right, Reese? I mean, I can only imagine how you felt when you got this story in your hands. And I, like, Zeyn, you are I call you a deep storyteller. I remember when I was reading Map of Salt and Stars and it just like falling into your story.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
And never wanting to come out. Your world building is just so brilliant. And this story touches me on so many levels, not only as somebody who's non-binary and coming to grips with that with myself, but also the tenderness, the vulnerability, and that gaze that you don't want on you all the time, and the way you turn that inside out and you make it so beautiful. And I actually just think it's a beautiful way to start this conversation and ask you both, because this anthology has so much, like, what to you what kink is, because I think to everybody it's something different, and these stories showcase it so beautifully. So we'd love to hear what each of your personal definitions of kink is.
Yeah, Reese, would you like to go first, since I just read?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm like still recovering from that reading. That was so beautiful, Zeyn. When we got that story, when Zeyn emailed it to us, I remember just being like, holy shit, like, we're so lucky to get to work with this. We're so lucky to get to have this in our book. Thank you so much for trusting us with your beautiful work, Zeyn. Let's see, what kink is to me. Well, I guess there's the answer I'll give as like the editor of this book, and then and the answer is as an editor of this book, it was of like first importance it was of primary importance to me and to Garth, just to not actually define it for anyone, because we just didn't want to. Kink can mean something to. Kink can mean different things to so many different people. And we've gotten some pushback on this since this book has come out. There are people who've been really upset, I think, by our not defining it. But I have generally found in my life, as like a Korean American immigrant woman who's queer, that when there are externally imposed definitions for me, that's a border, that's a wall, and sometimes sometimes that sort of like delineation doesn't work for everybody. And so I'll just leave it at that. For me and Garth, as editors of this book, we were just like, let's put it this way. We were very careful about how we put a lot of thought into how we asked for contributions, and we asked people, if I remember correctly, the wording was something like, we asked people if they'd be interested in contributing a story that was centered on kink as the writer would define it. And we did get stories in some cases where we weren't quite sure that the story did feel centered on kink. And there were a couple of people with whom, when we said that, the writer said, oh, you know what, you're absolutely right. And I don't think it is. And I think that the way the story evolved, it no longer is centered on kink. And so maybe this isn't right for the anthology. And then there were a couple of writers who said, no, like, to me, it absolutely is centered on kink. And here's a little bit of why. And in that case, we're just like, okay, great. Then it is. And so, yeah, that was sort of like the editorial process behind thinking about what kink is.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, when I first got the call for submissions and the invitation to submit, I actually struggled with it at first because I was kind of like, well, gosh, I mean, the kind of not just the kind of sex that I have, but just who I am and the way the world sees me, sort of inherently is seen by a lot of, like, at least by by a lot of cishet people, and especially a lot of people that really don't want trans people and queer people to exist in public life, is seen as sort of like inherently kinky somehow. And that, like, sort of hypersexualizing gaze that gets cast on trans people especially, is not a thing that I can ever escape, even when I'm doing things that are completely non-sexual, like just going out of my house every day. And so I started to really think, like, well, there's a way in which, like, I just don't get to even see the kind of sex that I and a lot of people I know have on the page, because it's considered not sort of literary, or it's not, it doesn't make for acceptable or important literature somehow, because it crosses some line that's really arbitrary, and personally, I mean, I'm not really sure that it's useful, between what is kink and what is sex. And I don't think that there really is a difference. I think the difference is mostly just in who gets judged to be, sort of acceptable to have a public life, in a way, like who gets to go out in public without being hypersexualized, and the kind of sex that they have being sort of demonized. And those things are completely beyond our control, obviously. And so when I was writing this story, I think a lot of my anger around those things came up for me. I haven't actually talked about this publicly, but I mean, when I started writing the story, I was actually being harassed and stalked by a neighbor, largely about the fact that my partner and I are a queer couple, that I'm trans. And so there's seeing this obsession that this particular neighbor had with, like, what kind of sex I was having, and about, like, that gaze being on my body, made me really start to think about, like, well, why is it that some sex gets to be literature, and some sex and some people's bodies can't be literature somehow? So, what is kink? I mean, I don't know. What is not kink, in a way?
Thank you both for those answers. I think they were both very thoughtful. And I mean, both of you talked about how, like, definitions obviously are hard. When you define something, it's still a personal definition, right? And so how does that, I like the fact, Reese, that you're talking about how you kind of left it open for the writers to define kink as they felt appropriate, and you even allow that space for them to argue back with you if there was a bit of disagreement. And I just love that sense of freedom. So I think that's a huge part of what it means to even be in a community, is you're constantly trying to define your identity and define what you like, who you are, and everything, and for other people who don't get it. And I think this is a great opportunity to just kind of say, like, all of this belongs, and it's not really up to you or me or anyone else to define what this is. And Zeyn, thank you so much for just being vulnerable in that moment and sharing what you were going through. And at that time, I'm so sorry, first of all, that was happening to you. But thank you for sharing with us, and thank you for writing the story that allows other people to hopefully, have more empathy and more insight into the lives of others. So just want to say thank you to both of you for that. A question that I have, since, that you KINK won the Joy Award, what about just creating and writing this, like writing your stories, creating this book, brought joy for you? And why do you think it brought joy to others and to the people who are reading it?
I could start. Well, first of all, also Zeyn, thank you for sharing that story. And yeah, I remain just so sorry that this has happened to you. Like, what on earth? Oh my Lord. Let's see, the joy of putting together this anthology. Oh, so many, honestly. Being trusted truly with these writers' work, and about something that, like writing about bodies, writing about desire, writing about marginalized bodies, having desires, like it can just like maybe just always is like such a fraught, vulnerable thing. And Garth and I just felt so honored that about every person's work that was shared with us, and trusted, and that we were entrusted with. And some of the best joy to come out of there have been so many varieties of joy, honestly. It's been so wonderful to just like, I feel as though like with this book, it did feel a little like creating a bit of a community inside the pages of the book, which has been so lovely. And so the events have felt so beautiful to be able to talk about these stories with these writers. Seeing how many people have been responding to the book has been really exciting too. And I feel as though this so often happens with the work of marginalized writers. This wasn't a book that sold easily. There was one editor out of the editors that our agent sent it to, who wanted to buy it. And a lot of the responses we got back from other editors were like, well, like we just don't know that there's any audience for this. And I remember there was one who said something along the lines of like, this is just like too outlandish for me, like too wild for me. And like, I remember thinking that was extra strange because like, I think this book was going out on submission right when the last, that book, 50 Shades, when one of those movies was coming out. And it was just like, y'all think there's no audience for this? Like, y'all think nobody's interested in this? How does this even happen? And so seeing that like people really do want to read this, and seeing like a lot of like the responses we've been getting from readers, has been just so heartening. And I think that's just, like for anyone out there who is a marginalized writer, who is a marginalized maker of art, that's probably something you're going to hear over and over and over again, that like that people aren't quite sure where the market is for it, and there just is, man. It's there.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's kind of wild because like since the book came out, it's become like a bestseller, and like people have, I mean, and I'm just echoing what you already said, but just like the number of people that have said how much they loved the book and that they really connected with it and they felt seen by it. Just like, I mean, it's kind of incredible. Like, I don't know. And partially like I kind of like watch myself saying that and I'm like, well, wait a minute. Like, why did I think that wouldn't be the case? Like, why would I have expected anything else? Like, because of course, like I think about how I feel about it and how I felt reading it and how I felt writing my story in it. And there's such a profound sense of like recognition, of just being able to actually put things on the page / into the record, if you will, of like how we exist, how our bodies exist in space and time, and how we feel desire and how we connect with each other and how we feel seen. And like to sort of, for me, like to recognize the sheer number of things that on a daily basis, even in my own work, that I feel like felt like I couldn't bring to the page, that writing this story and being a part of this anthology made me realize that I actually could, and that maybe we were just talking about this today, that like maybe we need to write more of those things that feel scary. Like maybe when it feels scary, like that's what we need to be leaning into that. Yeah, I actually really feel like being a part of this anthology, for me at least as a writer, like really opened up what I would permit myself to say in a way that I don't know if I would have done otherwise, you know, if I hadn't been really invited to do it.
That's awesome. Well, Reese, I'm glad, obviously, he's glad you extended the invitation.
Very, yeah.
I was actually just a little bit, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh no, I sorry. I was just gonna say that I'm like so moved by that. Thank you for saying that, Zeyn. And like quick note, one of the reasons we reached out to Zeyn is Garth and I had already read his reading, and Zeyn has books out that y'all should absolutely read that are absolutely wonderful. Okay, all right.
Well, that actually leads to the question I was going to ask was, how did you decide the authors to reach out to, actually? I mean, I know you said you sent out this general email saying you wanted people to, you know, write a story that ultimately centered kink and just like explore that. But how did you pick writers? I mean, Zeyn just talked about how scary it was in some ways to explore this side of himself and just in general, like, right, as a writer. And so what made you feel confident about the writers that you reached out to? Was it kind of an open call? Like, what was that process like in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see. When Garth and I think there were 3 stages basically. So the first stage was when we were putting together the proposal. And that was when our agent recommended that we just get some promises from a handful of people. And that was back in like 2015. So that was a while ago. Books always take so long to come together. And Garth and I just reached out to some writers whose work we really admired, who we thought might be up for this. We knew that they had written about things that fell within sort of like this tent. And that was the first round. Let's see. And then the second round, when the book was announced, when the book was announced, the book sale was announced, we just got like people emailed us, DM'd us, and reached out to us, who had something that they wanted to write and were interested in being part of the anthology. And then we ended up working with some of those people. And then and then at that point we started looking at like, okay, what do we have here, and what do we want the book to look like? And that was when we reached out to a handful more of writers. And so yeah, it was like 3 stages. And what ended up happening, of course, is that like there were people who, because most of the work was original fiction, there were a number of people who really wanted to be part of the anthology. And like, you know, had like, you know, 6 months or 3 months or whatever it was, totally forget, to write something, and still and like it couldn't come through in time. And so that ended up happening too, of course, and that ended up like changing the shape of like what the book would look like. I will say it was of primary importance, that the book have more marginalized voices than not, you know, and so like more people of marginalized genders than not, more people of color than not, and that was and more queer people than not, and that was just like super important to us, as like, and it was just so fun to get to do, you know, as someone who hasn't felt like a gatekeeper of any kind, not that I ever want to feel like a gatekeeper, but like as someone who hasn't like been in this sort of like editorial decision making position very often, getting to just be like, no, this is the world we want, and then just doing it, like it was just like, this is fun. Like I want to be able to do like things like this more, man.
Few additional stories that could maybe be volume 2, so you could maybe do it again.
Sorry about my technical difficulties.
No, welcome back.
Mercury retrograde is still happening.
It's still in retrograde.
It's still retrograding hard. I have a bit of a tangential question to that one, because the stories in this book, the way that they're ordered, like I think about like Carmen's story comes before Zeyn, and like the voice, because each voice is so distinct, and just like I know I'm like, Carmen's story is like, you guys, if you haven't gotten this book and read it, you need to, because her story is like Knights at the Circus meets Queen of the Night, like just brilliant. and then you end up in Zeyn's story, which is just as amazing, but like on a completely different level. So I'm just like, once you had the stories, once you had everything, like what was your process of like the ordering them? It's such a like writer, like editor question, but I'm fascinated to know, simply because there's just so much, so many voices and so much variety, and it's just wonderful. It came together so beautifully.
Thank you for saying that. You know, I know I had a good answer for this. The thing is, because it's been a little while, but what I remember is, okay. Well, I'll say that I'm a rule breaker when it comes to reading short story collections, and that I often just skip around anyway, which I know like horrifies like like people who publish short story collections, because they're like, why? I put so much thought into this. But that's so I went into it with that. So I was like, oh no. But then I just like looked at like some favorite short story collections, and I like gave myself a crash course and like trying to think through like how does the ordering work? How do people? Why is this anthology ordered this way? And then I had like an overarching logic, and now I don't remember what it is. But then I presented that to Garth and to our editor at the publishing house, and they were like, "Great, sounds good." So that was it. But I can't tell you anymore what the ordering logic was. But I swear it's in there.
That is
Your genius is hidden. Your genius is hidden. I'm going to jump in with another question just real quick, Bobby. I'm sorry. Because I want to know, Zeyn, what was the most delightful story in this collection for you?
That was my question anyway, was what was some of it, like, besides your own stories, what was, so we were on the same wavelength.
Fantastic.
Wait, y'all cut out a little bit. You're asking me what was my other favorite story in the collection besides my own?
Besides your own.
Yeah, besides yours. What was the most delightful story for you?
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, I don't know if I can answer that. I mean, I will say, because I love them all, obviously. But I will say, like, I mean, I really do love Carmen's story. But I remember reading Garth's story, Gospodar, because it appears in Cleanness, I believe. And I remember reading it there. And just being really so like Garth's work in general like is really, it's funny because I'm just like without words. I remember when I read Cleanness, how moved I was by Garth's work. And I remember reading this story and I mean this story in here, again, like we've all been saying this, but like if you haven't read this anthology, you really need to, because all the stories are amazing. But for me, Gospodar is a particularly amazing story. Just because I don't know that I can put into words why I love it so much, aside from the fact that it just feels so, it's like, I mean, he's a very masterful storyteller. But, aside from like the mastery of the language, there's this mastery of these very small emotional turns that the story takes continually. I mean, in almost every line, there's a turn, and as the relationship between these two people who have never met before at the start of the story, sort of come together and form opinions about each other and interact with each other, and the way they feel about each other changes, but they're not even necessarily saying it. It's all in the body, and also just the fact of like I don't know. I don't think that I just felt like I had never seen somebody be that honest on the page before in this particular kind of way about this particular kind of experience of desire and this mix of desire and shame that this protagonist feels. And I mean, I'm not being very articulate about this, but I just really love that story. And I actually just really love the whole book. I mean, the whole of this anthology, but Garth's work has always been really, has really moved me. And yeah, anyway, I love that like the two of you coming together on this project just like created something absolutely incredible. I mean, you're both like really incredible writers, and it's like it really shows in like both of your stories, and then also like all the stories that were selected for this anthology are really different. I mean, as you both said, but I love that it makes this really incredible, I don't know, I guess mosaic maybe of like where you're moving around from the story between the stories. And you're right, all of the voices are so incredibly different, and yet I think that's kind of part of the fun of having these sort of turns of like of almost like the stories themselves are kind of having this not confrontation in a sense of, oh gosh, Italian. In Italian, to confront means also just to meet and to connect, and to like to sort of be with each other. And so I guess I mean it in that kind of way, where it sort of feels like all these stories and their characters are in a room together, maybe at like, I don't know, some kind of amazing queer kinky party, and you can kind of like move between them and meet different people and see different scenarios play out. And it's amazing. So anyway, I'll stop being inarticulate and gushing.
I felt that was pretty articulate, so it's all good.
It's beautiful.
So Reese was talking about how it takes a long time for a book to come out. I mean, the proposal was around 2015, I'm sure, and it took a while for people to write stories and everything else. And the book ended up coming out of the midst of a pandemic when touch was not really an option for many people. And I'm just curious about, when did you figure out that this book was going to be published in pandemic, and how did that either change or shape the way you were editing Grease? And then even for you, Zeyn, when you thought about that release date, how did that affect the way that you felt about like gifting your work to the world in this time?
Well, let's see. We knew the book was coming out in early 2021 by sometime probably, I want to say in early 2020. So yeah, I guess that's like right when the pandemic was starting to kick in. I don't think it, I mean, like, of course, like we would have loved to like be able to, especially with our contributors, we would have loved to like be able to do events with our contributors in person. But especially with an anthology, it's also been just really lovely that we can do events with like, with Zeyn, who's in Italy, with people who are otherwise all over the country. That's been really nice. And this was I thought it was pretty funny, but I think it was also kind of moving that it came out. The book published the week of that trash holiday on Valentine's, and and it was it was clearly on purpose. Like our editor at the publishing house, Zach, like they were clearly thinking about that on purpose, and like the coloring too, with like the red and like the but I think people have been so lonely and so hungry for human connection, and it did feel just extra special to be able to, during a week when I think people tend to be feel more lonely than ever, because of the way that holiday functions, or that occasion functions, that occasion of like a saint, of like a martyr dying horribly functions, like it did just feel really meaningful to get to publish it, to be able to put this book out into the world in a time of like magnified loneliness and isolation.
Yeah, I feel similarly. I think, even just as I was writing the story, I definitely felt like, oh, I'm writing about something that is really hard, and like when I was drafting the story and I was thinking, well, maybe I'll try drafting this, even though I don't really want to write about something that's so difficult, and trying to like access desire and access joy and access connection in a difficult time. Like I would much rather write about something that is like purely joyful, or purely, celebratory, or thinking about pre-pandemic times when we're not like all trapped in our apartments, potentially with homophobes, but like, upstairs or whatever. But like that's where I was at. And so I think I don't know. I think there was a moment where I just kind of allowed myself to be like, well, you know what? I can't be the only one going through this. And maybe there's something valuable in trying to access, trying to write about how we access those more like joyful, connecting things, and live our desires, even when we're in the midst of a time that's so difficult. And so I feel like in a way, maybe that was the gift that I needed to give to myself by writing this, that I was like, well, you know what, if I need it, I'm sure that other people need it. And I hope that the book has been like that for folks. I mean, I think that it has. Like, I think people have kind of in the comments that people have made and the reviews that came out, I think that a lot of people did connect with it in that way, where they were like, wow, either because people were, not able to see their partners, their loved ones, or they weren't able to connect with other people, they weren't having a lot of sex, or just that they were connecting with themselves more, that they were just not in a state of mind where they even felt sexual at all. And they were realizing that like that, wherever they were coming to the book was okay, because I think the people that are in the anthology, I think the writers kind of chose to come to this and be like, we're going to come to it as we really are, and put that on the page and have that be enough.
That's wonderful. Yeah, just to add to that, in a way, these are also dangerous times. Being trapped in houses, like you're saying, Zeyn, with transphobic, homophobic, like just domestic violence has gone up, and then of course all of the hate crimes against so many of our people. And I think it's important for us to emphasize the courage that you both have all the time. I know you're both very active, like I am, sort of in activism and anti-racism and just fighting for our people and just in general. And to come from where we come from and the identities that we have, that courage and what you're talking about, taking that and bringing it to your work and causing joy and understanding is, it's why I do what I do. So I know it's why you do what you do, and I'm so appreciative of it. And I wanted to sort of just talk a little bit about, I know, in your introduction, Reese, you were talking about like you wanted this to be an anthology that was on writers' shelves, that was, like in residencies. I don't like to throw the word important around a lot because I think it's really a vital thing to talk about. But I think this particular anthology is a very important work, and I think it's something that's going to go beyond. Reese and Garth got tons of kind of scary pushback at the beginning of this. I remember there was that kind of dark whole time where it was just like really, and you always had you always deal with that, and if I could just like enclose you in something safe so you can do the things that you're doing, I would do that, because I know we're always unsafe. Like I am unsafe, you're unsafe, but it's harder when you're so much more in the public eye, right? And you guys as writers, that's big, But the statement that I think this book makes and made is so beyond just being on. Like I think it's an important thing to be on writers' shelves. Absolutely, one of those volumes that people should go back to again and again. But I want to hear like about what you hope beyond the writer's shelf with the statement that these books will get. I know we touched on a lot of the different things, but just like as people who are active, political in our identities and our lives and our diasporas and all of that, like what statement would you like this book to make across time?
Goodness gracious, Angela. I'm like tearing up. Thank you for saying that. Wow, I'm like overwhelmed. Let's see. A statement we want the book to make across time. And well, first of all, I want to make a quick note to say, like, I don't think the scariness is any harder for me and Zeyn than it is for y'all. Y'all are going through so much, and like bookstores are going through so much, and like just like the daily onslaught of shit y'all must be dealing with. Like I just no, the courage that y'all show on a daily basis is so amazing, truly. And yeah, but okay, a statement across time. I think an underlying reason that at least I wanted to put this book out into the world was to just make it more possible for more people to imagine that that if there's something your body wants, and if that something can be achieved consensually, then maybe that's not a bad thing. And maybe trying to deny that will fuck you up. And the world wants you to deny it. And the more marginalized you are, for sure, the harder it's going to be to most likely. I think that's at all controversial to say. The more marginalized you are, the harder it's going to be to claim that desire. The world is going to say you don't get to claim your desires, and you should be able to. And to the extent that you can in the world, in the part of the world that you live in, I hope you are able to. And at the very least, I hope that more people are able to get to a place where we don't hate our own desires, because I think that can be such a tremendous violence that the world enacts upon us and that we enact upon ourselves. And from that violence, so much more violence can come. And yeah, just desire is wonderful, you know. There's so many traditions in which people say that, like, what the ghosts envy about us, what the angels envy about us, is our ability to desire. Desire can be really amazing.
That is so beautiful. I'm also really I'm very emotional right now, and appreciative of everything that y'all just said. You know, I think, gosh, okay, statement across time. I mean, I think the big thing that was at the heart of when I was writing this story, and lies at the heart of the story itself, is this idea that, you know, for some of us, I mean, I was thinking specifically here about other trans people of color. We live so much of our lives being subjected to the gaze of cisness, heterosexuality, compulsory heterosexuality, patriarchy, you know, white supremacy, and those things, those gazes dictate not only what we are allowed to do and where we're safe and how we live our lives, but also how we see ourselves and what we permit ourselves to feel and want and do and be, which is, I think, arguably the most dangerous side effect of those gazes, you know, that we ended up putting them onto ourselves, even when they're not directed at us. And so, you know, the characters in this story essentially try to, and the narrative itself actually try basically to act as a sort of shield to turn those gazes back on themselves, so that by the end of the story, the peeping Tom, who is sort of representing those gazes, those harmful gazes, is sort of like, don't look at me, because the gaze gets turned back on itself. And the idea that that trans people of color especially can, by looking at each other and seeing each other, that our gazes on each other can be protective in a way, that when we see each other, we can try to get rid of that other sort of piercing, you know, eye of Sauron that is like on us all the time. So I guess it's just, I think it's the same thing I want to do with a lot of my work, is that, like, I want to provide that gaze, even if it's just in the form of what I'm writing, for people that maybe don't get to experience that sort of protective gaze of either of the self or someone like you who sees you in your totality, in your wholeness, and thinks, as you were telling me, Reese, today, this great quote that Garth said about writing for people that already think that you're beautiful. Like, for people that don't know what that feels like to have that gaze on them, of being enough and being beautiful, I want ideally to, like, make texts and make work that can do that for somebody, that can be some kind of tool to access that, because it is really poisonous, and the absence of that is really, really dangerous and painful. So I don't want that for us. I want better for us.
Just so beautiful. Thank you both so much. I'm trying not to get, like, emotional and listening to you both talk about it. Yeah, just your heart for what you do. And it's, I mean, I guess it's the heart of what all of us are doing, right? With Angela and her bookstore, what we do at The Word, right? It's because you're saying it is so poisonous to be in that space and not feel like, you know, you belong or that you're beautiful or any of those things. And so thank you for the work that you both do. And thank you for using your words to help, you know, start change, even if it is just with the readers that pick this book up, but hopefully it goes beyond that. And we just kind of continue to see a better world, and a more aware world that just kind of sees people for who they are and accepts them for who they are as well too. We have about 5-ish minutes left. And so I have a question, if there's no one in the audience who has a question, and that is the fact that this book, KINK, it seems like it's about sex on the cover. I mean, like you mentioned, it came out on Valentine's Day and like everything else. But if you were going to use one word to describe this book that is not kink or not sex, what would that word be? And Angela, you can chime in too if you want.
Don't put me on the spot.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to like do it in one, but I think honesty.
Yeah, maybe I would say vulnerability.
I'll go for openness.
That was my word, actually. I was like, open.
Might think alike.
Yeah. You want to throw a word too as well?
Yeah, I do what? What's your word?
Me? Did you say Ida?
Yeah.
Do you have a word too?
I would say connection, I guess, just because I see not only like, I guess that's a little bit looking outside of just what's within the book itself and just looking at the community aspects and how much this book has meant to so many people, and how much it means to the people that have created it and contributed to it. So I think that, connectedness, which might be like a cheat.
No,
maybe I cheated.
It's the book. The book itself is a community, and it encompasses all of those things, which is really wonderful. I'm not going to let either of you leave without asking the question. So first of all, Reese, like I just basically say for it. By the way, you guys, like Reese's story is amazing. Just like the way you cut to the quick. So fast. I love that. And I know you're working on something. But both of you are working on something, I'm sure. So let us have just a quick snippet of what might be on the dock. What's coming up?
Oh gosh. Reese, you want to go first?
Go ahead. No, go ahead. You go first.
Me first? Oh gosh. Well, I'm at work at a couple different novel projects and a nonfiction book length project. They're all really early days though, so it's hard to say. I'll say one of the novels is a YA and one is an adult. And I'm also putting together actually an art show with my partner who's a visual artist that we're doing a collaborative show in Corsica. This all sounds really random, but it stems out of research I did for the Map of Salt and Stars, actually, about legends of the night sky around the Mediterranean, but not just like in Southern Europe, which is more what people think of like Greek traditions or things like that, but including like indigenous Arab traditions, Levantine traditions, and then also traditions from North Africa that often just get completely like erased when we talk about the night sky. And we're putting together a visual art show and I guess what they call a double solo show, because there's two of us, in the spring in Corsica. So that's wild. So I don't know. My life is like very intense at the moment, but good, full of good stuff. So
sounds wonderful. Reese, tell me. I'm hungry. I'm hungry to know. Ingrid's already started to deliver, so now you have to.
Oh my God. Ingrid's book, Ingrid Rojas Contreras has a memoir coming out next summer. It's so fucking good. I've had the pleasure and the great luck of reading it twice, and like I cannot tell y'all, like it is like paradigm shifting, like so genius, like just like it's so good. It's so good.
I want it.
It's coming out in the summer next year. It's going to Galley soon, so Galleys will be available shortly. I'm working on a novel. I've been working on it for like close to 6 years. The shit always happens. Like the Incendiaries took 10 years. And like, granted,
so you're Donna Tartt. It's okay.
I did start this. In the meantime, like the Incendiaries came out, like KINK came out. Like I have been very distracted, but still. Anyway, I'm hoping this one takes like 8 years. Is now my goal, not 10. Like that's like I'm like 8 years, like that's shorter, that's better. But it's about two women, a ballerina and a photographer, and the photographer becomes they're both women, and I guess I already said that the photographer becomes professionally and then personally obsessed with the ballerina, and so there's like a lot of like queer kinky sex in it, and the book is, to speak to what Zeyn was saying earlier about terror, like the book terrifies me, I can only write it by telling myself on a daily basis. I'm just like, no one's going to read this. It's totally okay, Reese. This is just you. This is just you. No one's going to read this. It's totally fine. Like I say it out loud to try to calm my body down. And it really helps too. Just an FYI for anyone who gets spooked while writing, just lying to yourself and just saying like, it's this is just for you is can be really useful.
I can't wait to read that though.
Yeah.
I really can't.
Well, Sandra Cisneros says, right? What scares you? Like, that's what you're supposed to be writing. If you're not writing what scares
Yeah.
you, then
What are we even doing?
yeah, what are we doing? Like, oh, we're safe. Yeah, that's for other people. I'm so excited. Oh, so profoundly grateful for both of you being here, just existing,
thank
gifting
you.
us with your work. Grateful to the word. Y'all are, I love you guys.
Thank you, guys. We love you also. We love all of you. You're all wonderful. I had to make sure my mic was actually on or off, I guess. Not off, on. But yeah, thank you all for joining, and thank you for doing the work you do and doing it fearlessly, or as fearlessly as you can. And thank you for everyone that is not on screen that has joined us also. And you can learn more about the Word and Margins Bookstore Month on our website. You can also purchase KINK from Duende District, or you can go to our bookshop and check it out there, or you can buy it from any of your favorite Margins bookstores. Tomorrow, we will celebrate Michelle Malonzo of Changing Hands. She was our BIPOC Bookseller Award winner in leadership. And also thank you to everybody that made a donation in support of the event today. You help keep us all going, and you help uplift marginalized voices. So lots of thank yous all around to all of you.
So many thank yous.
Thank you all so much.
It's gonna be like,
Thank you
Yeah,
for
thank
Michelle's
you
my
so
girl.
much
I
for
am so
having us.
excited.
No, this was such a blast. Thank you again for being honest and vulnerable and open with us, and just sharing your work with the Word. We loved it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll go ahead and cut it here.
Take care. Thank you.
Have a good night. Thanks so much.